Carmen Maria Ortega Rodriguez heavily waddled to her comfort chair and settled down, then slid her mounted desk tray in front of her. Pregnancy seemed to make everything twice as difficult. She pressed the answer button on her computer screen, and her father appeared. "Hola, Papa," she greeted him. "I'm sorry I was late answering your call. I was ready, but at the last moment I had to use the restroom again. I cannot wait to have this baby. It seems I spend my entire day going to or leaving the bathroom." Her father, General Manuel Oscar Rodriguez Ibanez, chuckled and replied, "It's all right, Tutor. Tu Mama had the same experience. Are you well otherwise? How is the baby? Is Hector treating you well? If there is any trouble, I can speak to him." Carmen laughed and shook her head. Her father seemed convinced that the way to ensure marital tranquility was to completely terrify his son-in-law. "Papa, stop. Everything is fine. I'm fine. The baby is fine. Juliana is fine. Hector's fine. What about you? I saw that you are a general now. Felicitaciones." Maury frowned and sighed. "I held off as long as I could, but they gave me no choice. Either take the promotion or retire. Fortunatamente. The bootlickers don't like competition or getting their fingers dirty, so they are content to let me stay out of sight doing real work, while they go to fiestas with contractors and politicians." Carmen laughed. "There are worse things in life." Then she gave him a big smile. "Hector and I have been talking, and since we named Julia for his padre, we will name this baby for you." She stroked her belly thoughtfully. "Manuel, if it's a boy. Manuela, if it's a girl." He smiled warmly. "I am humbled. Thank Hector for me. But if it is a girl, you should name her Elena for your mother. You don't want to risk a girl looking like me." Carmen chuckled. "As long as it doesn't have your temper. Was activating a volcano to burn the entire forest on Gefelt really necessary?" Maury rolled his eyes and shook his head. "You know how rumors are. The volcano was semi-active already with minor eruptions. The terroristas we were chasing had a headquarters somewhere in the forest. My orders were to take the planet because the government was sheltering them. Irv-Garv had authorized me to glass the whole continent if necessary. I was able to find out that the local government wasn't colluding with them so much as they were being occupied. The terroristas had no hesitation about taking hostages, killing civilians, or destroying infrastructure. We narrowed down hiding spots. Once we discovered where they were, I had the men clear the dry underbrush from the rest of the forest and put it on their section. They were given a choice, surrender or burn. They were used to the local government who was afraid of them. It was their own volcano that really started the fire. Actually, by clearing the brush out of the rest of the forest, we actually saved it and the surrounding farmland. Because of the terroristas, the local government hadn't been able to properly manage the forest in several years. Instead of being an apocalypse, the fire was actually a controlled burn." Carmen was impressed. "Papa, it is hard to say what is more amazing, the rumors or the truth," she sighed. "I am due in 3 weeks. I wish you could be here." Maury shook his head and sighed. "I wish it too, Rita. But the good news, I have my schedule for the next 6 months. December is free. I have plenty of leave. I can come for Navidad, Año Nuevo, and Bautismo for the baby. And I can still visit your mother in the monastery on La Luna." Carmen looked at her father kindly. "Papa, it's been almost 15 years. There is still no cure, and Mama would not want you to be alone. I know of some very good women, widows, who could be good for you." Maury's face grew hard. "Carmen Maria, I am a married man. I vow to your mother in sickness and health until death. We are both still alive. If I cannot keep my vows, then I am not worthy of her or the Templars." Carmen asked, "And what if you die before they find a cure?" Maury smiled wryly. "Then I simply will haunt her." Carmen laughed. They continued chatting and catching up. The old woman sat in front of the cryo-suspension unit at the San Lucas Monastery on La Luna. This great room housed dozens of these units, each with a couple of small pews facing the unit. She washed and quietly knitted baby booties for her newest great-grandchild. The doctors and technicians worked steadily on the unit, administering medication to the patient inside in literally the slowest way possible. Cryosleep slowed metabolism to a point near death. To keep the body alive, though, blood still had to circulate to supply nutrients and remove toxins. This was done intravenously in order to keep the heart as inactive as possible. The excruciatingly slow pace also gave the doctors opportunity to see very gradual results of any treatment, so that ineffective or harmful treatments could be halted immediately. But the worst part was the waiting. The old woman finished a booty, staring at the chamber for several minutes, then began another one. At this rate, the baby would need at least 6 feet to wear all the booties, but another few hours were small compared to the almost 60 years she had been waiting for the patient to be revived. Another hour passed, and a novice nurse came bearing a tray with a meal. The old woman thanked her, and they prayed together, giving thanks for the food, and asking for the recovery of the patients in the cryochambers. The novice asked to join the old woman, and she nodded. After eating, a deaconess walked the aisles with a censer, with incense smoke wafting out. She paused in front of each cryo unit, giving a brief blessing. When she came to the cryo unit with the woman, she gave an extra blessing and led them through the rosary of San Lucas, St. Luke. She departed, then the novice pointed to the cryo unit and asked the old woman, "How do you know Sister Elena?" The old woman, Carmen, smiled softly. "She is my mother. I wasn't even 20 when she was put here. I didn't think that I would ever see her alive again. I had hoped, but I never believed that it would actually happen. Then I got the message that they wanted to try reviving her with a newly developed antivenom. Since Mama still had an immediate relative alive, they had to get my permission instead of asking the order. Evidently, they developed an antivenom from my mother's infection, so she should be the most compatible test subject. So I consented, under the condition that I get to monitor what happens here." She paused a moment. "La Luna is nice. The lighter gravity is a relief in my old bones." The novice asked, "If it is not too personal, how did she come to be in cryosuspension?" Carmen knitted while telling the story. "Papa was a Terra Marine, and Mama is, a nurse with Air Force. They met at a quinceañera just before he was due to leave for boot camp. He wanted to be career military. It was no surprise when he joined the Order of San Martin for the Templars. Mama and Papa talked for 3 years until she graduated high school. She had wanted to become a doctor, but that would mean spending many years apart from Papa, so she joined the Order of San Lucas so she could become a Templar medic. The Templars would ensure that they could be stationed and deployed together." Carmen paused, tying a new ball of yarn to her knitting, where the old yarn was running out. The novice touched her fingertips to her mouth and spoke with admiration. "I think that is the most romantic story I've ever heard." Carmen smiled and continued. "Mama was ready to marry after completing her novice training, but Papa insisted that they wait until she had been through her first battle and had been initiated into the Order. He already had been through a few battles and had seen many devoted people who quit the Order instead of being initiated. I asked Papa what his plan was if Mama had decided to quit instead of being initiated. He said they would have bought a mobile kitchen so they could sell empanadas." Carmen chuckled. "Mi padre had quite a reputation. While I can easily picture them in their little kitchen making empanadas, no one else would ever believe it." The novice smiled and glanced at the nameplate. It read, "Elena Valentina Rodriguez Ibanez." Her brow furrowed a moment. "There's something that seems familiar." Carmen replied, "If it is important, you will remember." She pulled out a small crochet hook and wove in the loose ends until you couldn't see where the yarn had been joined. She pointed to the spot. "When you have babies, it is very important to make sure there are no threads that can get around little fingers and toes. The first booties I made for my son, Manuel, I didn't properly weave in the starting yarn. The poor child screamed for hours in pain. I tried everything. Finally, I took him to the hospital. A nurse found the problem even before the doctor could get to our room.
She even showed me how to check his clothes and weave in the end so it did not happen again. I wish my ma had been there. She always knew what to do."
The novice nodded sympathetically, and began looking through the finished booties while Carmen continued her story.
"So Mama got through her first battle and went through the initiation ceremony. Papa attended in his Templar robes, so immediately after the initiation was over, they insisted that the bishop marry them on the spot."
Carmen dropped a stitch in her knitting and paused to correct it, while the novice had a puzzled look, like she knew she forgot something.
"Papa's unit was due to deploy to the Galler offensive. Fortunately, the transport ship was awaiting a medic, so Mama was able to be temporarily assigned to the ship. The Capitan let them use the visitor's cabin, which is how the rumors started."
Carmen chuckled, counted stitches, and continued.
"It seemed that somehow everything Papa did was bigger than life. The rumor, by the time I heard it, was that Papa took over an Earth Force ship to host their wedding, and conquered the alien base as a wedding gift to Mama."
The novice laughed also.
"Where do people come up with these things?"
Carmen winked to the novice. Then she continued knitting and telling the story.
"Normally husband and wife aren't allowed to serve in the same unit, but the Templars interceded and got Air Force Command to attach her as a battalion medic. They were in several battles and skirmishes together until Mama got pregnant."
Carmen noticed a light flashing at the front of the stasis unit. She counted softly as it flashed for a few minutes. She stood up and spoke to one of the technicians. They talked for a moment, then Carmen sat back down while the technician spoke with the doctor.
"The technician is good. She listens. The doctor, he is arrogant, like many are. I have learned to play a little game with them. The doctor doesn't want to listen to an old woman. He will barely listen to the technician, so I talk to the technician. She then talks to the doctor, asking him to humor a frail old woman. The doctor looks at things, thinks about it, and when he has been able to convince himself that he made a miraculous discovery, he has the technician tell me how brilliant he is."
The novice scowled. "That's not right. He should listen. Someone needs to set him straight. You shouldn't let him do that."
Carmen shrugged. "There will be many times in life where you must choose between doing what you want and getting what you want. As much as I want to beat him with me chancla, I want my mother more. So I smile and praise him. It keeps him happy, so he will listen to what the technician tells him."
Carmen looked at the booty, counted rows, checked her pattern, then began knitting and speaking again.
"When Mama got pregnant, the Air Force and the Templars tried recalling her back to the monastery. However, the battalion was on a humanitarian mission to Plaukan. They are arachnids, so extremely matriarchal. The local government refused to cooperate at all, since the officers were men or childless women. They view males as only useful for breeding and unskilled domestic labor, and childless women as juveniles or defective, depending on age. The officers and diplomats tried everything, including offering a tour of the support ship, which was what finally worked. When the arachnids came through the medical bay, they saw Mama treating Papa and a sergeant with several wounds from a fistfight. It seemed that Papa, being a junior officer, had made the mistake of trying to argue with the old sergeant, because technically he did outrank the sergeant. She was scolding both of the men. When the Plaukans saw them, they saw a pregnant woman dominating two males, which made them quite receptive to her. Air Force made her the liaison for the duration of the mission, which was well over a year. That is why I have dual citizenship, Earth and Plaukan. I was the first baby born in the rebuilt hospital there. It is always amusing when I travel and the concierge scans my ID.
Just then the doctor walked up to them. "Excuse me, Frau Ortega. I just wanted to update you on Schwester Elena's progress. The new antivenom seems to cause some dehydration, so I adjusted her IV fluid to give her more." Carmen smiled at him winsomely, and spoke in a soft voice that seemed to have suddenly become frail. "Gracias, doctor. You take such good care of mi madre. Thank you for adjusting her intake fluids and waste drainage." The doctor got a confused look for a moment, then smiled so proud of himself. "Ja, Frau Ortega. I was going to adjust the waste drainage once I updated you." Carmen squeezed his hand with her own trembling and weak hand.
"Mama is in such good hands with you."
The doctor went back to work.
Carmen's hand and voice seemed to instantly recover as she continued knitting and talking. The doctor seems to forget that my mama was a nurse, so I learned some things. Like if you increase fluid to a patient, you have to increase drainage to prevent bloating, which is potentially dangerous in a cryo unit. The novice shook her head and rolled her eyes. That's outrageous. Would he have adjusted the drainage if you hadn't reminded him? Carmen shrugged one of her shoulders slightly. Yes, when the system would eventually set off the alarm, but this way, appealing to his ego, I got it done right away. Carmen paused thoughtfully for a moment. Where was I? Ah, yes, Plaukan. Because of the nature of Plaukan society, it was necessary for Mama to have husbands attending to her at all times, or at least appear to be. Since the Plaukan saw that Papa and the sergeant were Mama's husbands, it was just easiest to keep that appearance. As a result, the sergeant took Papa under his wing, and Mama became like a spoiled daughter to him. He wound up being my godfather at my bautismo. In later years, Mama, Papa, the sergeant, and his wife would laugh at the stories of Mama bossing around Papa and the sergeant. She was getting a reputation also. Carmen looked at the clock. I must be keeping you. You don't have to sit here and indulge an old woman. The novice gave her a warm smile. Actually, Sister Marie told me to come talk with you, to listen, because you had seen a lot of history. The novice hesitated a moment, then spoke again. I was accepted to the Genetic Research Institute as a backup candidate, but now I've been offered a seat. So now I'm trying to decide. Should I continue with the Order of St. Luke, or should I go to the Institute? I do also want to get married and have children one day. I know I could do that at the Institute, but I'm not sure about the Templars. Carmen nodded. That is why Sister Marie sent you to talk to me. Because both of my parents were Templars, a Marine and a medic. I can tell you about how it will be for your children. I can tell you, if you become a Templar, you will need family that will care for your child a great deal, for months at a time. I spent a lot of my childhood with my grandparents and aunts and uncles, plus boarding school. While the Templars have resources and boarding schools, your children are ultimately your responsibility, and you will have to live with the decisions. Carmen fumbled the knitting for a moment. The yarn had caught on a rough corner of a fingernail. She put the knitting aside in her large bag and pulled a nail file out of her purse. She continued talking while she filed her nails. I was lucky to have loving family, but school was different because of moving several times. It seemed that I was always either bored because I had already learned what was being taught, or I was on the verge of failing because I was behind. Being with my parents was wonderful. It was like Christmas. But when they were deployed, I missed them terribly. Mis abuelos and mis tios would complain that they would spoil me when they came home to make up for lost time. They were right. My confirmation and first communion parties were ridiculous. There seems to be two kinds of Templar parents, the ones who raise their children in the same austerity that they live in, or the ones who lavishly spoil their children. The novice's brow tightened as she continued listening. Then it was time for my quinceañera. Actually, because of another deployment, it wound up being put off until just before my 17th birthday. Mama was so excited, and Papa was ready to frighten the men, because they remembered how they had met at Mama's quinceañera. They were determined that it was going to be the most exorbitant party in memory. They actually hired a circus and had a carriage for me that was a throne with white horses, and their hooves, tails, and manes were painted gold. The crown for my purity from Papa was going to use magnets to float down to my head in what would look like a meteor shower. Until the news came. Carmen sat quietly knitting for a while, gathering her strength to continue the story. Human Marines were sent to Rakaz, a horrible jungle world where everything tried to kill you. It's much like Florida. It was a joint operation with Chunagov. You may have heard them called Space Otters. The Otters have always been good allies to us. They aren't much use in combat, but they have no love of power, just peace and harmony, so their cities are all extremely pleasant. The Otters and humans were in the process of terraforming the planet when the Myrd came. They are vile, hideous creatures with the worst traits of insects. They are somewhat like scorpions. Their exoskeletons are hard enough to reduce damage from kinetic weapons, and they are unbelievably strong. They also have a deadly venom that kills most species fairly quickly in agony. Humans are a bit more resistant. It kills us in minutes, not seconds. They also do not recognize the laws of warfare.
Carmen paused, breathing heavily, steadying herself.
Papa was leading the charge, with Mama and the other medics following. They were in their power suits. Papa used to marvel at how Mama could operate her suit. While his had various weapons, hers was almost completely stripped of weapons, having medical equipment instead. She could administer treatment to up to 4 patients at once, depending on their needs. The fighting was very intense. Mama was treating wounded all over. If you got to a patient within a couple of minutes of him being stung and administered antivenom, he had a good chance of survival. Mama treated many that way, injecting antivenom, gluing shut wounds, then power jumping to the next. She even got stung herself and immediately took antivenom so she could keep going.
Carmen sobbed for a minute, pulling a handkerchief from her purse to wipe the tears and blow her nose. Then she took some breaths and continued.
Another nurse, who had also been stung, said it is the worst pain in life. Worse than giving birth, as though you had just been cast into the lake of hellfire, with El Diablo chewing on you.
Both women crossed themselves, reflexively.
It was unbelievable that Mama kept going. She was treating another unconscious Marine when she was stung again. She injected herself with antivenom, but it barely worked. The Marine's power suit was disabled. It couldn't move. So she ejected from her suit, put the Marine into it, then sent her suit back behind the line while she got into his suit. She just stayed, shooting everything. Papa saw a disabled Marine suit firing rapidly, so he sent a couple of men to go help it. They told him who it was.
Carmen sobbed a bit more.
Then Papa ordered them to take her behind the lines. He gave orders to grab pieces of dead Merit, set them on fire, and fling them to Merit fighters. He hoped that such an atrocity would distract them so the Marines could get Mama to safety. That is where the rumor came from, that he would cut a limb off of an enemy soldier and beat him to death with it. The Merit did retreat back to a safe position, so Papa called in fire support and glassed their location. Then he went back behind the lines.
Carmen noticed she had become lost in her story, and had knitted a section too long. She took one of her needles, wove it for an earlier row, then unraveled the extra rows. She resumed the story when she was able to start knitting again.
Mama was given a 3rd dose of antivenom, which should be lethal. Actually, 2 stings or 2 doses of antivenom should have been lethal. As it turned out, my brava saved her.
Carmen paused a moment to double-check the pattern, then continued knitting and talking.
Mama had recently gotten pregnant again, but didn't know it yet. She and Papa had decided to have another child, so she has started taking supplements and enhancements to prepare for pregnancy. The birth control drugs had cleared their bodies much faster than usual, which is how Mama got pregnant early. Her immune system was being boosted by her pregnancy. Mi hermano perished in her womb. Papa named him Angelito because he saved Mama. Mama was immediately transported to the support ship, and they induced a coma. Papa was given bereavement leave so he could escort her back here to the monastery. It was a slim hope that she could survive. The venom had necrotic effects, so they could not purge it fast enough to save her. The only choice was to put her in cryostasis, hoping that by slowing her metabolism near death, they could leach the venom and antivenom out.
The novice gave a small sob, with her hand over her mouth. Tears rolled down her cheeks. As a couple tears rolled down Carmen's cheeks, following the lines and wrinkles on her face, Carmen reached over and clasped the novice's hand in her own. After a few moments, Carmen reached into her purse, pulling out a handkerchief and a small container of tissues, and offered one to the novice. The women dabbed their tears for a few minutes. I was called to meet Papa here at the monastery. I thought nothing of it, because Mama and Papa had brought me here many times before. In fact, when I was a child, Mis Amigos and I would sneak in here and the mausoleum to play hide and seek. I never realized why I was never really punished for it until much later. Mama and Papa were letting me become familiar with death, just in case. Carmen just sat for several minutes. The novice felt shaken inside.
She had been studying battle wounds and field treatment for PTSD, so that wounded fighters will recover from trauma faster. She had heard terrible stories, but those stories were always about someone else. This time she was hearing the story directly. She felt a weight pressing her chest. Carmen closed her eyes for a few minutes and sighed. I was given a message to come here. I just figured that Mama was here checking on patients. The duty technician led me here. When Papa saw me, he hugged me, and for the first time in my life I saw him cry. I was terrified, but they had taught me to always be brave. When I saw her name on the unit, I was in shock. I just went numb. Papa and I just stayed here. When he finally fell asleep, that's when I cried. Carmen took out a medicinal lotion and rubbed it on her hands. The pungent smell of strong spices and eucalyptus seemed to hang in the air. I cancelled my quinceanera. Papa tried to convince me to have it because Mama would have wanted it, but I just couldn't. We actually wound up giving much of it to one of my cousins. Papa was granted a long sabbatical. Days turned into weeks and months. Finally, the Mother Superior here told us that we had been grieving long enough and needed to start living again. I asked Papa if he had any regrets. He said he wished that he and Mama had more children. Carmen reached into her purse and pulled out a couple of candies, offering one to the novice. Once they were done, Carmen started talking and knitting again. Papa never remarried. Once the diagnosis had been confirmed, the church would have been willing to grant him special dispensation to declare him a widower, but he refused. He came to visit her whenever he was on Earth, and said that once he died, he planned to haunt her, so she wouldn't get lonely. Carmen chuckled and shook her head. Papa changed his name after that. With Latinos, the husband's name is the primary name. When only one name is being used, it is the husband's. But Papa started using Mama's name instead, so Capitan Rodriguez became Capitan Ibanez. He spent the rest of his life waiting for her. He was between life and death, which is probably why his behavior became even more outrageous. I think he was actually relieved when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He had been exposed to radiation several times, so it metastasized very quickly. By the time they caught it, it was far too late. When he gave me the news, I knew what he would do. The novice's eyes grew wide-eyed, fearing the next part. Suicide was considered a mortal sin by some, but surely God would forgive when someone was already so close to death. Carmen let out a long sigh through gritted teeth. Papa volunteered to help rescue survivors from Hurricane Larry. The area was devastated. People were trapped in wreckage of collapsed buildings, and the area also lost power. He died helping a family escape from their home that they had been trapped under for 3 days in a flooded basement. Everyone always thought he would die standing on a mountain of dead enemy soldiers, being glassed from orbit. Instead, he drowned in dirty water less than 24 inches deep. But he still died a hero because the children were near death and would have perished without him. When the town was rebuilt, they named the school after him. The novice started blinking quickly. Wait, that can't. Are we talking about General Manuel Oscar Rodriguez, Ibanez Elementary in Miami? Carmen smirked. Your father was Maury? Now Carmen actually laughed. I see his reputation is still intact. The novice just sat there, blinking rapidly. I assure you, the stories about him are... well, not everything you have heard is true. Carmen and the novice sat there talking. Carmen told more stories about her parents, verifying and correcting some of the rumors. The novice brought dinner for both of them, then excused herself for her daily chores. Carmen stayed a while longer until she finished the booty she was working on. She was sleepy now. She packed up her knitting and walked over to the cryo unit. She laid her hand on it gently and whispered, Soon, Mama. Just a little while longer. As she walked to the small room that had been set aside for her, she decided that the child had enough booties. Tomorrow, she would start making hats.